Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balkavage, and we're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers podcast. No co-host today, no Dr. Erica, no Dr. Kelly. I think I can do this one on my own. I think I might be able to do it. I do have a guest today, and I want to introduce everybody to Elizabeth Rodgers. She is a PhD in epidemiology, but she is really, at this point in time of her life, she's kind of recreated herself as a functional medicine practitioner and a health coach. And she is someone who kind of focuses and talks like I do around some of the challenges we have both in the allopathic model and in the functional medicine space. And I know that's sometimes heresy to say, hey, we have a problem in functional medicine, but I think one of the things we want to do is not circle the wagon and shoot in at our own group. But what I think what we want to do is really have a conversation around where do we see functional medicine maybe not headed in the right direction, and how can we improve functional medicine so that we can offer what allopathic medicine really isn't trained to do and trained to offer. I think there's a place in the world for both professions, but we do totally different things. But the expectation many times from the patient, the client, is that it's the same goal, it's the same objective, and it really isn't. And what we really are going to talk about quite a bit today is how the philosophy that kind of surrounds allopathic medicine is starting to blend into or drip into functional medicine. And that's whave we both kind of see a potential problem. And we want to kind of get our voices out there and let people know that, hey, what you might have experienced in a functional medicine approach may not truly be a functional medicine approach, but what I call the greenwashing of medicine. So with that being said, Elizabeth, I'd like you to I want to welcome you to the podcast, first of all, right? And then the second thing I want to do is just have you take some time to just explain how you got here. Like, what's your background? What were you doing? You had a bachelor's, you had a master's, you have a doctorate. None of this is in functional medicine. So how the hell do you become a functional med coach and talking in this space when it's really not what you spent way too many years going to school to learn?
Yeah, so nice to be here, Dr. Eric, and
Sure.
all of those listening. I'm just totally thrilled and honored to be here. But these are all awesome and amazing questions, and I'll be thrilled to answer them for you all. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to explain how I came into this space, because I did not do it in the traditional way. But it's interesting because for me, what I've I came into this world 3 years old, Dr. Eric, literally knowing that I had a purpose to fulfill and that it was to help other people heal. And so since I was seriously in preschool, I put one foot in front of the other, knowing that that was my path and that's what I am here to do. So, when you're growing up, you think, well, I want to help people heal. That must mean I need to be a doctor, right? So I was following that very traditional path. I got my bachelor's degree in psychology. I went and got my master's then in public health. And at that time, I was actually applying to do the dual program. I was going to get my MD and my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh, where I had gotten my first graduate degree. Now, at that time, I unfortunately ran into some life-threatening health issues, and this is where my story changed completely. And my life just took a very, very different turn, one that I never would have expected. But to anyone out there listening, if you're someone who knows you have a purpose to fulfill and you're just not sure, just know that eventually you will look back and it will all make sense, because I can do that now. I look back and realize that every step in my path, every education, every degree I got, everything was leading me up to exactly where I am now. Because what I do know is that what happened to me, and I'll share this in brief and give you all the Cliff's Notes version, but while I was working on my master's degree, I went into the hospital. I had kidney stones, and unfortunately, I had to have an emergency surgery. But what happened during that emergency surgery was that my kidney stones were not removed. I was sent into septic shock. I was told after my kidney stones were removed by the surgeon that within 72 hours, I'd be walking out the door feeling like $1 million. I'll never forget that, except 72 hours later, and then 10 days later, I was in the hospital declining quickly and no one could figure out why. So I had another doctor put on my case thanks to my family. And I was told at that time I was in septic shock. I said goodbye to my friends and family at that time and was taken into an emergency procedure, but told that it was a 1 in a million shot that I was going to come out of that alive. So I said my final goodbyes and believed that this was where my story was going to stop in this lifetime. But through what I believe is also divine intervention, I survived against all the odds. And then what happened after that, Dr. Eric, is that I began what became the navigation of the traditional healthcare system as a patient. So I spent the next year fighting for my life, having over half a dozen surgeries. After that happened, then I began my chronic illness path, where I started accumulating all kinds of different symptoms, and you name it, from GI issues to emotional issues like PTSD, anxiety and depression, to thyroid issues, bringing us right to the topic of your podcast, hormonal imbalances. Basically, I was a mess and nothing was making sense. No matter where I went, any specialty, I was being given diagnosis after diagnosis, pill after pill, but ultimately none of that was getting me where I needed to go. And I knew all along that traditional medicine was overlooking the root cause, because when I was being told things like, you have inflammation, your hormone levels are off, I kept asking why, right? If there is inflammation in my body, there is something that is triggering it. Why? The more I asked why, the more I was met with resistance. So at that point, I went out into the alternative healthcare realm, sought assistance from functional medicine doctors, from naturopaths, from holistic practitioners. Again, ultimately, what I didn't get were the answers I was looking for. What I was looking for, Dr. Eric, was a practitioner who I felt not just understood me, but who was going to give me the time to make me feel like I was being heard. I wanted a doctor, a practitioner who was going to listen to me and hear me and make me feel like they were going to help me put the pieces of my puzzle together. I felt like if I could just have a doctor, a practitioner who would help me take a step back, look at the bigger picture holistically, my entire story, put the pieces of this puzzle together. I just felt convinced that if someone would just do that for me, that I could get to the bottom of this, except that person never came. And eventually I ended up on the floor in my bathroom in a puddle of a heaping mess with the worst GI symptoms in the world. I'd been diagnosed with IBS, slow colonic transit, and a number of other digestive problems at that point in my life. And I got myself up off the floor and looked in the mirror, and I think we all have times in our life where we hear some other voice. And for me, it was that moment. And I realized that the answer I was looking for was staring me straight back in the mirror all along. And that if I didn't do something now, then who was going to? And I could hear a voice saying to me, if not you, Elizabeth, then who? And so that was the day that I decided that I was my only choice. I felt I had the skills and expertise as an epidemiologist, right? That's what we do. Epidemiologists, and I'll explain more how I came to actually create what I'm doing now through my practice. But as epidemiologists, Dr. Eric, what we are experts and trained to do is identify, analyze, and determine the root causes, what is underlying why things are the way they are. So at that point, I started mentoring and shadowing with naturopaths, Ayurvedic practitioners, functional medicine doctors, you name it. I went and I trained with every one of them. And then I went off and did my own holistic health training in holistic health so that I had the skills to become a practitioner, so that I knew how to apply advanced medical information. And then I also brought in energetic and spiritual healing modalities. I am an advanced medical intuitive. And as you hit on at the very beginning of the podcast, one of the missing links I feel is that where we go as practitioners is that we kind of go into one corner or the other, right? And we feel that we're supposed to pick. However, I don't think that's the case, Dr. Eric. I think that as an epidemiologist, as I've watched the prevalence of chronic disease, not just in this country, but around the world rise, do you realize that at this point in time, here just in the United States alone, that 6 out of 10 adults every day are living with at least one chronic condition, and 4 out of 10 are living with 2 or more. Now that tells me that science and research have not solved the mystery of chronic illness, and that is part of what I came here to do. So I believe in a union of traditional and non-traditional. And at that point, what I did, Dr. Eric, was create what eventually became the backbone of my current practice. And I created a holistic healing protocol, and I literally healed myself. I healed myself from IBS, from chronic constipation, chronic bloating, from anxiety, from depression, from PTSD symptoms and sleep insomnia problems I'd had for years that no one could help me with. I healed myself from chronic UTIs, from acne, from migraines, from every single problem that every traditional practitioner said to me, you're going to have to take this medication and just accept a lower quality of life for the rest of your life. I don't believe that anyone should have to accept that. So if you look up the definition of epidemiology, to anyone listening who's not, I think now with COVID, we all hear about epidemiologists, but I also don't think that means you necessarily know just what it is we do. So if you looked up the definition of epidemiology, right, it would say in a textbook or reference something like, epidemiology is the study of the frequency, distribution, and determinants, which is causes of any health issue or outcome, and the application of that study to the control of those outcomes, improvements, or diseases, but ultimately with the goal of the improvement of the health of the population. So the way I like to explain that in simplistic terms is that what we do as epidemiologists is that we study and determine the patterns and causes of health issues. So just like any other doctor or field, we have specialties. Some of us specialize in the environment. So they study things like air quality, pollution, safety. Some of us specialize in infectious diseases. These are going to be my colleagues on the forefront of the pandemic. Some of us specialize in injury prevention and control, cancer. My areas of expertise within my field are chronic diseases, disability, and aging, and in particular, healthy aging. So I am an aging epidemiologist. Now, what does that mean?
All right, so hold on. Let's
Let's
slow the roll a little bit here because there's a lot to unpack here. So
it's a lot to unpack, yeah.
So part of this is you go to school. Your initial undergrad is a bachelor's of science in psychology, right? So that gives you a little bit of study and in kind of physiology, how the body works a bit to some degree, and then you go on to get a master's in public health. So as a master with a master's in public health, what's the goal as a master's in public health and the doctorate in epidemiology? You want to get involved in what is actually causing healthcare challenges, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So this is from a traditional training. You're doing this before you get your illness, right? So you really, at this point in time, are you really kind of working in the conventional mindset of allopathic medicine and maybe what would we consider maybe mainstream? I don't know. That's another question, but you're kind of working in that allopathic mindset, right?
I was 100% working in that allopathic mindset and trained to think with that allopathic mindset, if that makes sense, because I'm sure it will to you as someone who is trained as a doctor, right? A lot of the way we think isn't necessarily because that's who we are and the way we think independently, but we were trained to think that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain way we're trained about things. And we do like what's the symptom? Here's the thing, right? What's the disease? Here's the cause. So we'll kind of circle back to that in a moment, but from an epidemiologic perspective, the goal of as an epidemiologist is to really uncover the root issue, the root cause, right? Foundationally, that's what an epidemiologist does, right?
Exactly.
And so to some degree that, there should be this meld between medicine and epidemiology to some degree. But if you get to when you take a step back and you look at that, and I'm sure at some point you had to step back and take a look at it and say, wait a minute, my training is on identifying root cause issues.
Yes.
But there's somewhere that communication, there's a communication loss somewhere between what we're doing in epidemiology, which should be a branch of allopathic medicine to degree to say, hey guys, if you have this disease, here's the potential causes, right? So somebody in allopathic medicine might say, of course, you silly guy, right? Of course, that's exactly what we do. But there's some of us, and you'll probably say, yeah, it's me, who are saying, wait a minute, there's a disconnect here. We're doing this epidemiology to say, hey, this pollutant, this toxin, this organism can cause problems in the body, but we're not picking it up. We're not passing that baton on, or that message is getting lost somewhere in that allopathic model, where it's really the attention gets away from the root cause and back to what's the sign, the symptom, the disease, or the thing that I either need to cut, treat, or manage, right? Not necessarily
Exactly.
root cause, right?
That's
So
exactly it. You couldn't have said it any better.
So at what point do you have that kind of epiphany? That is it the illness that causes the epiphany, or were you having those kind of inner conversations before the illness?
So I love this question. And I have to tell you, it was both. But it was the combination of having those simultaneous experiences that finally led me to have that more aha moment. But all along the way, I was in grad school, and I'll tell you, Dr. Eric, I was considered the non-traditional one in my very traditional epidemiology department at the University of Pittsburgh. So I was pegged very early on as someone I was even told, actually, the very first dissertation that I proposed, I was specifically told that I could not do this topic. It was too outside the box. I was thinking I was too innovative of a thinker, basically. But what I was watching us do, Dr. Eric, is as epidemiologists, what we do is we also study, like you were getting at, not just what are the underlying biological root causes, right? Like what's going on at the biological, cellular, pathogenic level that might be creating a physical manifestation of a symptom, but what are the factors that impact a human being's health and ability to heal each and every single day that traditional medicine is 100% over. The allopathic medicine is 100% overlooking. And I think that's the first place, but where that bigger aha moment came for me. So I was making these silent observations, all along. But then once I became a patient myself and started living the experience of what I was studying and actually having to go through that, it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back every step of the way when you're in that allopathic system, and it's a waiting game. And when I watched the time, the money, the energy that was being taken away from me, the quality of life that I was losing, while they seemed to be perfectly fine just writing me a prescription and sending me on my way and considering that a quote unquote successful outcome. Yet I did not consider that a successful outcome because I am the patient and I felt that I was the one evaluating my quality of life. And it also started me as a researcher, Dr. Eric, to make me think about also the way we study people in research, right? We often as researchers say that things that are considered self-evaluations or something that we ask you your opinion of, like, Dr. Eric, what would you tell me your quality of life is today? We consider that soft data. We consider that data that's not as easy, not as quantifiable, not as easy to study and understand. But what I started to realize were that all of the things that we were turning away from, that we were closing the folders, that we weren't reading those testimonials, we weren't reading those stories, we weren't reading about those quality of life measurements that were giving us so much rich data with respect to why people are really struggling. Do you know what we do with that data? We literally put it in folders and we put it in storage facilities and boxes, and no one looks at it unless somebody like me decides they're going to write a dissertation about it. So I realized that there was just this big, wide, gaping hole. We have access to this information in allopathic medicine, Dr. Eric. We are just choosing not to use it. So I realized in that moment that I had to start to make a change. So that was really when that big aha moment came, because I was struggling. And then I just realized that we're just missing the mark.
Well, I think, to be fair, and I was a very harsh critic of allopathic medicine, and I don't think, I think allopathic medicine has its place, but I think functional medicine has its place.
Yes.
And I think the issue is that I think we need to redefine where these concepts fit, right?
Totally.
And so the role, I think most people think of their allopathic physician as the person who's going to get me healthy. And I
Right.
don't think we see as much of that in allopathic medicine. It's more of a business of health, of disease management, illness treatment, sickness management. It's not that medical physicians aren't helping people heal and recover, but as
No,
a
they saved my
general,
life. They're
yeah,
necessary. We need them. But like you just highlighted exactly it, is that I think it's time that we redefine what each piece of the, where
health puzzle.
yes, because like you said, there is I think a huge misnomer out there that we go to allopathic medicine to heal. But like you said, that's not what we necessarily go to allopathic medicine for. Allopathic medicine saved my life. Allopathic medicine gave me diagnoses and pieces to my health puzzle that I absolutely needed. But where then it falls short, is where where our functional medicine docs and our holistic docs and our other modalities start to come in. And I think we just need to bridge that gap and start to help people navigate this better. Don't you feel like we're such a broken system right now? Like we get people stuck in allopathic medicine rather than having an allopathic medicine doc say, you know what, Dr. Eric, I think you've got IBS. This is one option for you. We can prescribe you Linzess. I will tell you, this will just help you manage the symptoms, though. It's not going to necessarily give you permanent relief. If that's the pathway you'd like to take at this point, I'd recommend that we refer you out to a functional med doc, or we send you to Dr. Rodgers, and let's have her take you from there, because she's really going to be the one to help you guide yourself to take those next steps. But we don't have those connections yet,
No, I don't think we do. I think for a while, there's a whole bunch of, allopathic physicians don't even know that there's this parallel universe of functional medicine that exists. But I think the issue becomes that because an allopathic physician is taught what they're taught, and they're trained the way they're trained, they wouldn't necessarily look outside that box. Like, I'm doing the right thing. You have diabetes. I'm going to give you medications to manage your diabetes. And the reason you have diabetes is probably because you eat too much, you don't exercise enough, and it's a terrible lifestyle. And that's why you have diabetes. And they can manage it. They can manage the numbers, but it doesn't necessarily make the person healthy. Okay, because that's a whole nother discussion, which is what is health, what's wellness, what do we use as the terms,
Exactly.
and we'll talk about that. But I see where the primary role of medical physicians at this point in time is they do a really good job with acute care.
Yes.
And they do a really good job crisis management, dealing with that crisis and managing conditions, managing symptoms, managing somebody's health. And I think you're exactly right. Where we need to get the bridge, right, is to say, okay, I got you managed. Now we got two choices. We can either manage you like this, but you're going to probably continue to degrade over time, or we can get to work on root cause issues, changing your modify your diet, modify your lifestyle, find out what really drove this process to begin with. That's going to take some work on your part. It's going to take some time on your part. Your insurance may not want to pay for some of that care. You are responsible for some of that. And if you want to do that, here's where we got to send you, because they're going to do that. I'll manage the medication portion. There's going to probably be a need to reduce some of those things in time, but we're going to try and keep you safe while you fix those things, right? We're just not having a good conversation there. And I think it's really, to some degree, it's kind of ego driven on both sides. To some point, it's allopathic medicine may not even realize there's this thing out there. And I think there's also this idea that this is this crazy world out here where this is all foo-foo stuff and none of it matters, right? And so I think it's a combination of those factors. And I think the only way that we improve healthcare system in the crisis we're in right now is that we have to put people back in charge of their responsibility, not have a third party be responsible for what is going on. Because if you are the person who has to, if you are the person who makes decisions. If you're the person who's initially financially responsible, even if an insurance pays in the back end, if I have to take the $100 out of my pocket or the $300 that the value of the appointment's worth,
Yes.
you're going to have a total different representation of what you're going to do and what's going to be done.
100%.
Because if you said, hey, it cost me $300, I got to pay that first to go to an appointment to get $400 of medications that I have to go back next month and pay $300 to get $400. That hurts right now. And that's where people are going to like, hey, I can't do this over and over again. What do you mean? You're adding another one to the system? Now it's $600. Now it's $700. That's what will give people pause. Right now, it's almost like this invisible thing because they've paid insurance, they've paid, but it's not coming out right there, right? So it's a different thing.
Yeah.
Right.
It almost feels like you're not paying, right?
Right.
You're so exactly right. Even my fiance had a stress test a few weeks ago. He actually got a bill the other day for the stress test for $700. And he called me so upset and said to me, he said, what am I going to do? I don't want to pay this bill. Why? I didn't know. He said, if I would have known that it would have cost me this much, I wouldn't have had the test. And I said, right. But they don't tell you that up front, do they? So you hit the nail on the head. That's part of, I think, a big part of why there's this still existing disconnection, because when people come to us and we say, well, we don't take insurance, these types of things come out of the pocket, it almost feels like, and I've done it too, and I did it too in the past, when I was on my journey, you almost turn away from those things and stop yourself from considering it up initially, just because there's no assistance with that coverage. Mm-hmm. And so it takes on a different meaning when, like you said, when 100% of the cost is coming out of your hand, it takes on an entirely different meaning.
Yeah. And I said this to patients many times when they're frustrated with medical care and they're going back to the same physicians and getting the same advice and the same medications, and they're not feeling satisfied, they're not feeling listened to. And I ask them, why do you continue to go back if you don't think your doctor is listening to you, if you don't think your doctor is doing the right thing? Why do you continue to go back to the same person? And the answer is often because my insurance covers it.
Exactly. I've had so many former patients, excuse me, when I was in my clinical, very traditional career working in the hospitals and clinics, I had so many patients tell me that same thing, or that the reason they were doing things the way they were doing them was simply because of insurance. They were being controlled. Their decisions were being controlled by the insurance. They would say things to me, well, I can't choose another doctor because I can't afford to.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I hate to, it's not like we hate to give it against the allopathic physicians, but unfortunately, there's a model that has to be followed when you have a third party that's controlling healthcare, right? When an insurance company is kind of dictating what can be done, how it can be done, what tests can be done. I mean, I had my own personal experience where I'd broken my coccyx. I didn't know I had broken my coccyx, but I had a lot of discomfort. I went to my GP to say, hey, I'm in a lot of pain here. What do you think is going on? And he did a physical exam. He said, hey, I think we got to send you off to get get some prostate tests done because it's all swollen in there. Let's go get this checked. Yeah. I get the test done. The test comes back negative, and I get a $400 bill in the mail. Mm-hmm. And I called the insurance company and I said, hey, why did I get the bill? And they said, because you're under 50 and the test is negative. Okay. So I said, well, if the test was positive, would you have covered it? She said, well, absolutely, we would have covered it. I said, okay, wait a minute. So if my medical doctor reaches up somewhere where nobody should reach, right? And feels something, that's a physical exam, and then says, with my clinical training, I think this needs to be evaluated with the test so we can rule it in or rule it out. Yeah. And you're telling me because the test was negative, I have to pay. But how would we have known if the test was negative or positive if we didn't run the test to begin with? Shouldn't medical necessity be dictated by the medical physician who's actually doing the test?
Not the insurance company.
Right. And unfortunately, that we've departed from who gets to determine medical necessity, unfortunately.
You find it interesting that my last traditional job was actually, I left academia thinking, okay, I'm going out into the real world and that's where I'm going to make a difference, because the Institute of Medicine estimates that there's a 17-year gap between the time that we actually publish research and it actually getting out to the real world population. So I thought, I'm going out, I'm breaking out into the real world. So I went and worked for the insurance company, and I thought, I'm going to be the one, I'm going to break the system and make the change from the inside, until I realized that just who I was up against. And I can tell you that it's a very dark world there. I went into that system, Dr. Eric, and I intentionally, I applied to a Harvard program called the Disparities Leadership Program, because it's so incredibly important to me for us to be addressing and thinking about these other factors that impact our health and wellness every day. Came back, had this big project ready to launch, and was told, well, what's the ROI on that, Dr. Rodgers? And I said, well, the ROI on that is that over the long, I actually had data, I shown them that over the course of this many years, these outcomes would reduce. And over time, you would actually save a lot of money on some of the types of chronic conditions that cost you the very most. Well, that's going to take a long time, though. They didn't like that. So it was I learned just how much they really control the system. And
it's the issue is, and I think this kind of gets missed too, is that in the insurance company is making money on how much they pay out.
Yes.
And so people are like, wait a minute, why would the insurance want to pay more money out? Because then they're losing money, right? They don't lose money, right? So these are some of the most, some of the biggest revenue generating companies there are.
Yes,
so for people to understand, there was an act, I forget what the name of the act was, that said that roughly something to this point, that an insurance company couldn't keep more than 20% to cover their expenses and for profit, right? All 80% of your premium has to go back out as payment. And so you would say, well, lawmakers said this will capitate costs, right? This will be the trick, right? And so unfortunately, people who are running insurance companies are really smart people.
They are.
And so for the listener, you're probably going, why would I don't get it? So if I'm the insurance company, right, and I'm only willing to pay out $80. I don't want to pay out any more than $80. I can only charge you $100 as a premium, and I can only make 20.
Right.
Well, dang. Yeah, I'm not paying out much, but I'm only making $20. I got this big company to run. But if I'm willing to pay out $800 on you this year, then I can make 200, and I can charge you 1,000.
Yeah.
Hey, now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
So for an insurance company, they have to pay out claims. They have to have expenses so that they can justify collecting more money. The only way you make more money in this game is to pay out more. And there's this fine line year after year that I have to be able to kind of I got to pay out enough that I can justify increasing the rate next year, right? Because if I only paid out $800 this year, I can't charge you $1,200 next year. I have to be able to justify it. So there's this game that's played that I need to pay out a certain amount of money so that I can collect more and I can justify the rise next year. And I think that's where people sometimes don't understand. This is a money-making machine, right?
Yes, it is. And they literally, I can promise you, because I worked in that department, they spend every business operating moment, every 5 days a week, crunching numbers and figuring out how to continue to play the game and win at it.
Right. And so that's why you go, well, why are they paying claims? They're doing it for me. They're not doing it for you. At the end of the day, as a business, not the person, but as a business, they're in there to make more money this year than they made last year. And the way to do that is to pay claims right to the cusp where I have enough to justify raising rates next year and making more money next year, right? So that's part of the problem.
And don't you feel too, Dr. Eric, that part of this problem has taken even more power away from the patient? Because think about it, right? Like, you have a business, I have a practice. And so the people that are the most important to us are the people that drive our business. So those are the people we serve, except see now in healthcare, it's no longer just coming out of my pocket, it's coming from my insurance company. So they're more inclined to appease my insurance company than they are me, because I'm not really the one paying them all that much money. They're getting my money from my insurance company. And I think that has just done such a disservice to the patient, the individual patient.
Yeah, and I also think it allows for bad healthcare to get paid for, and across the board, bad physicians who aren't doing a good job get to continue doing a bad job because a third party is paying them, right? Yes. If I didn't think you were doing a good job, and it's a cash service, I would just stop paying you.
Right.
Right. So, but if a third party is paying and they don't, it's a money thing. It's not about how great the care was. It's about a money thing for the most part. In functional medicine, it's a bit different. If it's a cash-based service and you don't think you're getting value for what I charge, you just stop. You just don't pay me. There's no third party. And I think it makes us, it holds us to a higher standard, because now if the patient's not seeing the change or the result they want, they leave, right? And so it keeps you on your toes. You have to do the right things. And not to say that that every patient's easier, they're going to get better like that. But if you, as the patient, don't think your functional medicine provider is working their butt off to help you get better, or you don't think you're having success, then you let them know, hey, I'm not happy, I'm not satisfied. If they can't change the strategy or change what's going on, then it's time for them and you to say, hey, I'm not helping you enough, we need to get you somewhere else, or the patient's just going to leave, right? That's the difference. I think that to some degree, it's sink or swim in functional medicine. You're either going to help people get well, or you're going to sink. In allopathic medicine, you can be a not so great physician and still be fine because somebody else is paying the bill, right?
Exactly.
So I want to have this conversation with you because I don't want to make it sound like we're beating up on allopathic medicine to agree, but but where do you see we're now seeing more allopathic physicians coming into functional medicine? We're seeing people coming into functional medicine, and I think there's a foundational problem starting to occur with functional medicine, and I think it revolves around the philosophy of what functional medicine should be, and what allopathic medicine is, what functional medicine should be, and what I see a lot as what functional medicine to some degree is being kind of becoming. Where do you see the problems in functional medicine?
I love this question and this topic. I think that one of the problems, it goes back to what we were talking about, is coming from all of our training, right? And this is something I hope through my career to continue to do, is be an advocate for improvement and change in curriculums in medical schools, in our foundational trainings, right? Because like I mentioned earlier, the way we think, we're trained to think that way. When I was teaching principles of epidemiology to, first-time master's students, the first day of class, I would always say to them, this is a unique way of thinking. It is not for everybody. You might get frustrated, but know that you can be taught to think this way. And I think then like we said, some people get very married to those philosophies, and then they decide they're going to bring in a new tradition or a new philosophy, and they start coming over to functional med. But I think that they bring that philosophy with them which is fine. But at the same time, I don't think they start to adopt a new philosophy. I think like you and I are talking about how we've kind of got a system now where we've got the players in place, we've got the puzzle pieces, but they're all disconnected. And I think this creates even more of a disconnect, is that our philosophies, if you're going to come into functional medicine, allopathic, with an allopathic background, I think it's not necessarily beneficial to stand firm on that philosophy of allopathic medicine, but to use it to inform you. And that's really the way I like to think. You know, I have these very traditional trainings and they help inform what I do, but I actually use them to create, a different philosophy.
Yeah. So I think what I see is that we have the function, we have this kind of I want to say this allopathic or philosophy, and it's, hey, what's your sign? What's your symptom? What's the thing I can hammer back into range? What can I manage? What symptom can I, get rid of? And we say, oh, that's terrible. We shouldn't do that. And then that person moves into that philosophy, moves into functional medicine. And then what you see is the functional medicine practitioner is essentially using an allopathic philosophy saying, hey, the thyroid medication's not good. That's not the way to do it. We're going to give you a glandular because that's better. Exactly. Instead of saying, why did the person develop thyroid issues to begin with? Well, I don't know. Well, that's our job as the functional medicine practitioner to say, yeah, I don't know that the glandular is better than the T4. I don't know that. What I do know is that they developed a thyroid condition for a reason, and I need to get to the root issue as to what's causing it, right?
Exactly. That's what we do. Exactly.
And the problem in the nice box we like to see in sometimes in allopathic medicine is if you have high blood pressure, the tendency is to redefine the problem as the sign or symptom many times, right? So, hey, the reason you have what you have, the reason you don't feel good is because you have high blood pressure. So we're going to suppress your blood pressure. Okay, so maybe they're safe now, but if we bring that person to functional medicine, we say, you have high blood pressure. I agree. But now we have to uncover why you developed high blood pressure. Is it because you have high homocysteine? And if you do, we have to determine why you have high homocysteine. Is it B vitamin deficiencies? Is it magnesium deficiency? Is it there's some type of underlying infection? Is it disrupted sleep patterns? Is it disrupted breathing patterns? Is it because you nasal breathe or because you mouth breathe all night and you've got hypoxia? Like, we need to go through.
Yeah. And what's the level of stress like in your life? Because you and I both know that can be a major factor in contributing to these types of chronic recurrences.
Right. And so part of the issue is, I think, to be fair to allopathic medicine, because a third party controls what's going on, there isn't the time to say, okay, let's dig through your health history and get to the root issues, right? It is, let's manage your blood pressure, right?
That's all I've got time to talk to you about today, because that's all the time I'm allowed to give you today.
Right. Yeah. And so that person's like, okay, I got treated. I think that's healthcare. No, that isn't healthcare. That's disease management. And that is not what somebody's expectation of healthcare should be. And we in functional medicine have to be raising our standards to say, no, they got you safe. Now, healthcare is to actually get you healthy. Right. And that's a different model. So that gets you managed and safe. And now you're going to come to us to get you healthy. And I try and get patients to understand, like, if you got in a car accident, yes, your insurance is going to pay for the car to get repaired many times. But your insurance company isn't paying for you to change your oil. They're not paying for you to maintain the balance in the front end, right? They're not paying for you to change your spark plugs. All the maintenance that is required to maintain a healthy car is an out-of-pocket expense. It should be a person's priority and responsibility to do that. And that's where the functional medicine practitioner can come in and say, hey, look, I know you're having these problems. Here's the reasons that you're probably having those things. And some of those things the patient may not be aware of, but it's our job and our responsibility to dig into that and say, hey, the reason you have these things is because of this, this, and this. These are the lifestyle things we need to get you to change. These are the dietary things we need you to change. Here's what I call the fitness factors, the lifestyle factors that must change, improve, or or you have to increase your fitness in these areas if you want to get to health. Does that resonate with you?
Every single word you just said resonates with me, because these are the exact things that I echo to my clients on a daily basis. And interesting too, because you just made this thought pop into my head, Dr. Eric. And do you think too that part of the reason we're kind of stuck in this place that you and I are describing right now is because we don't have this strong research evidence base that can prove to the allopathic practitioners that, hey, this model works. If we transition somebody at this kind of stage to this model, we can have this type of impact on people. And I feel like if practitioners like you and I start to, I also feel like it's a need for us, as the practitioners on this side, to start to unite, join forces, collaborate, so that we can make our voice stronger and talk about so that we can all collaborate and decide, okay, here are the gaps, just like you and I are highlighting now. What can we do as a group to help start closing these gaps realistically, more at the, at the institutional and systematic levels?
Yeah, I think what we have to do is definitely have a better communication with the other healthcare practitioners so that we're all working towards the same common goal instead of circling the wagons and shooting in, which is what we often do. There
Right.
shouldn't be an argument.
No.
I shouldn't be saying, well, your medical doctor is bad or your endocrinologist is bad. They're doing what they're trained to do, but we shouldn't have the other opposite. And I think too often we circle the wagons and shoot in, just like we do in the nutrition world. Right now we have, you have the carnivore group, saying veganism is bad, and vegans saying that paleo is bad and paleo. And so we've circled the wagons and shooting in, and the processed food industry is looking at this and going, what a bunch of assholes, because they don't really get that the real issue is us. This is great. Let them kill each other, because we don't even have to say anything. All you have to do is sit back here and make more crappy food that everybody eats. Everybody gets sicker. We get more, everybody eats more. It's great. And all these people are arguing and shooting each other down when all they really need to do is join forces and say, hey, look, right at any given time, a healthy food diet may have to be tweaked a little bit. But if we keep this concepts around whole food, real food diets, you could do great on a vegetarian or a vegan or a carnivore or a paleo or what. You could do good as long as it's whole food, real food diet and not some processed frankenfood. But we're so blind sometimes to really what's going on, because I think it's kind of ego driven, like I want to be right, instead of saying, hey, we can all be right. But if we work together, we have the greater opportunity to make a difference. But we've moved the target from the thing it is to something it isn't, and now it's a futile attempt to try and make something that's actually a good option look terrible.
Exactly.
To make yourself look better.
When in reality, I feel, and this is where one of the things that makes me very different as a doctor, and I have a very strong feeling you feel this way too, but I've never believed that it was my place to marry myself to a certain philosophy or belief system, because what I do when that happens is then, whether I mean to or not, I push that on to the people I serve. And I believe that it's my place to open the space for patients and clients to decide what they feel is what they believe, what's right for them, and find that place. I think part of it too, like you said, is that we see egos coming in from those different professions and corners, feeling that this way is the way, my way is the only way. Same with the diets, right? Paleo is the way, or eating meat is the way. This is the way. And I think that what I wish for the world is that we could stop thinking that our way is the way, or that there is only one right way, because that's just simply not the case. I think we're moving into a place where people are going to continue, I hope, to demand more individualized and customized care for their health and wellness, because you and I know that it is very individualized, and what might be right for one person as far as their diet goes might be completely wrong for me. you know?
Or the diet that's good for you for the next 30 days is not going to be good for you in another 30 days, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I think part of the problem that we have centers around the definition of health, right?
Absolutely.
So the problem is everybody assumes they're healthy, right?
Right.
Well, I'm healthy compared to that guy. I'm healthy, right?
That's
So,
right. Yes.
so the issue is, do you have a definition of what you would assume that you would think healthy is?
I
Like,
love that. Well, my answer is that, and this actually is something I have to attribute to my mentor who in my master's program, Dr. Ron Laporte, who is a brilliant scientist. And I'll never forget him saying this to me, and I've lived by this definition of health ever since, which is that health is not merely an absence of disease or infirmity. It is a state of complete physical, mental, and emotional well-being. That's what I think health is. I think what we do is we focus on that part of the definition that health is either an absence of disease or infirmity. So it means if on the surface I'm not feeling any physical symptoms, that means I'm healthy.
yeah. And I think we're still in a gray area for a lot of people because they're like, what does that mean? Like, what is well-being? Right. So if you look up well-being in the dictionary, what is it? What is that definition?
Yeah.
The definition is often a state of health.
Or a state of optimal health. Yeah.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? You know, and I often catch myself saying things to people like, you know, I'm here to help you restore yourself to optimal health, mind, body, and spirit. But what does that mean? And I have to tell you, when I ask clients and patients, what does that mean to you? Everybody's definition is different. You know, and I think that is what health and wellness is. What is it to you? And that even takes me back to my research days when I would work with patients and participants. And we were trained as researchers, right, not to guide people towards certain answers. So if someone would ask me, well, what do you think about an answer? I was trained to always respond by saying, whatever it means to you. And now I think about that more and more, and I realize just how right that was all along. It is what it means to you. So what does optimal health look like to you? Because like you said, Dr. Eric, to some people that might look like, I would like to just manage my type 2 diabetes for the rest of my life. And I'm okay with taking medications because I don't feel that I would like to give up my current lifestyle. But to someone else with those exact same conditions, they might say, I'm tired of feeling like this, and I'm willing to put in the work and do whatever it takes to change my life for good.
Yeah, and I think I would differ with you on that because I think we have to have a
cohesive,
right.
a standard. What in epidemiology
if you're going to say that everybody gets to define it, then everybody's healthy. You could be on your deathbed and say, well, I'm dying, so this is optimal for me, right? So I think we still need to come up with a better standard and a better definition. Even from a lab's perspective, the lab reference range is not a health range. That is a disease range. So when you're outside the lab range on a lab report, you're 2 standard deviations away from the midline or the mean. And for most things, it's not necessarily this for everything. You're within 95% of the population that is included in that 2 standard deviations. But that is like saying, hey, you didn't fail, so you're great. You're a great math student because you didn't fail. And that's not necessarily the case, because we could say, well, that student says I'm a great student because I passed, right?
Exactly. Oh, you just got me so excited, because what you made me think of is that, isn't it funny and isn't it true how this is what we do as scientists, doctors, and researchers in the traditional sense, right? We have done a lot of research and very carefully evolved those thresholds and those ranges that you're talking about right now. But isn't it interesting that we haven't seemed to actually define what those same ranges would look like for an average healthy person? We have we even done the work to determine what those thresholds and ranges look like?
I don't think we've actually done a very good job with that as a standard, but I think for the most part, it's a double-edged sword to some degree. So part one, I would say that the closer we are to the median on a lot of those things, we would say if we were within let's say we're within a standard or a half a standard deviation, now we're within the healthiest, 37% of the population, or the healthiest 16 or 32% of the population, if we take a look at both sides, right? So that may be a better standard to say, hey, if you have optimal health, you're in that half standard deviation of the range. Okay, that's one part of it, right? When we look at labs. But we can't even just say that, because the problem is when we take a look at labs, a lab value could be totally normal and it could be appropriate. You feel good, you function good, and everything's normal.
Yeah.
But a lab value could be normal and totally inappropriate, right?
Yeah.
So example is, I'm tired, I'm fatigued, my hair is thinning, I'm constipated, low libido, and my TSH is normal or low. Okay, so the doctor looks at it and says, you don't have a thyroid problem because your TSH is normal. Well, hey doc, did you run inflammatory tests? No. Well, then you didn't run the rest of the thyroid panel. Right. So you don't realize that the inflammatory mechanism is going to, early on at least, drive down TSH. It's going to increase hypothalamic T4 to T3 conversion, which is going to drive down TSH. Okay. So the patient's value may be within that half a standard deviation, but they're not necessarily healthy either, right? It's not appropriate. And then a value could be abnormal and it's totally appropriate, right? And I wouldn't say the person's unhealthy because the value is out of normal. I may say, listen, that value is elevated. That means your body's reacting to something. Oh, by the way, you have an infection. So that inflammatory marker is totally appropriate for a healthy body that's trying to fight off an infection. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does. And do you think, Dr. Eric, that, what you just described is, a perfect example of a very individualized case, and just how much there can be, what a wide range of variance there can be in those numbers and ranges, whether it's for a healthy person or not. I almost wonder if that's where, as far as the research base goes, that we need to start evolving, is almost looking at these cases, these complex cases, starting to look at the way the numbers change and evolve. And this is where, very traditional epidemiology would come in, because there would be a way to, look at these numbers and situations. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at is just, are we looking at it from the right perspective, right? Instead of just focusing on the numbers, maybe we should be looking at the other pieces of that puzzle that are driving the numbers in a research study alongside it. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I think the problem becomes, in a research study, you can only control so many variables, right?
Exactly.
And so but we don't live in limited variable situations. There's too many things to take a look at. So in real life, we can't control one variable because there's so many factors. And that's what makes scientific research good and bad, right? Because you say, well, we put them on a high fat diet. Well, okay, wait a second. What is your high fat diet? Is it healthy fats or is it a processed food diet? And what else went on during that time frame? Was that person sleeping 8 hours a day? Did they have nasal obstruction, so their mouth breathing? Did they have problems in their marital relationship, in their work relationship, right? There's just too many factors to really do a good double-blind study, placebo study, right? It just doesn't work.
But this is real life, right? Like, you're highlighting why I left the traditional setting, because we can't control the real world.
Right. So we have to be better at putting the pieces together. And you can't, and for the listeners, what we're trying to kind of get across here is that in a limited time environment and under constraints of a third party, it's very streamlined what can be done and what's allowed and appropriate to be done. Right. In a functional medicine, the restraints are off, right? It is us and the skill of your practitioner to say, okay, got to take a step back here, look at the 30,000 foot view, get an idea of how we got here in the first place, and how can I kind of reverse engineer this issue. In allopathic medicine, it's very like system oriented, like it's the thyroid, it's the GI, it's whatever, and it's all disconnected. And in functional medicine, it's all about the connection and how when there's a cell stress response, everything is impacted about that. And like you were talking about all the things you started to develop. And, you know, when a patient comes to me and says, I've got this and I got this and I got adrenal issues, I got gut issues, right. You shouldn't be surprised that your hormones become compromised and your gut becomes compromised and your sleep becomes compromised and your emotions become compromised and your hormones are, that should all be anticipated. When you have an excessive stress response, you stop normal homeostatic regulation, and all those normal kind of aspects of physiology get down regulated because I got to put time and attention to cell defense. And so what I call that is a multi-system adaptive disorder, which is, hey, I've got a blood sugar problem. Yes, you do. Of course you would. Why would we bring sugar into a cell that's under stress? I have a gut that's not working right, because you're under stress. You're not going to stop and have a meal, or you shouldn't be if you're under, like, being attacked by the tiger. My hormones are out of control. I can't believe this. Well, of course they're not going to be. If you're running from the proverbial tiger, are you stopping to have sex? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
And so we in functional medicine, and this is important for the listeners, is if you are looking to a functional medicine practitioner and their focus is on trying to fix a lab value or manipulate a lab value with a supplement, that's then allopathic kind of philosophy, where it should be. It's not that we don't use supplementation, but the goal is not to fix the lab value. It's to say, okay, how do I reduce the stress response, reduce the danger response so that we can get back to healing? And how do I support the healing and recovery? Not just how do I hammer a lab value back into range, and I'm doing it better because I'm using supplements versus that medication.
Exactly.
Right. So if you're the patient, you're saying, I'm frustrated with medicine, I'm taking 5 meds, and you're going to functional medicine, and now you're taking 25 supplements in place of those 5 medications, I don't know that that's better, right? Matter of fact, I'm pretty convinced that that's not the better solution. We didn't fix the problem, right? All we did is greenwash it and say, well, these 25 supplements are better because they're natural. Well, they can still be part of your new problem that you created with your 25 supplements.
Exactly.
So
you still weren't really addressing what was going on at the root.
Not addressing the root issue. And I'll give you a great example, because I was working on this before we jumped on this call, but I work with a client who high cholesterol, high lipids, liver enzymes up, hormones are in the tank, having a lot of issues. We start working together and we get them start working. I said, listen, you got to get off the statin. Statin's inhibiting your hormone production. We got to get off of it. And so within about 3-4 months of working with him, supporting gut physiology, changing his diet, changing his lifestyle and working on these things, cholesterol levels are back to normal, no lipids, liver markers back to normal, no medications, right? So we're off the medications. And then in a window of a month and a half, his primary care runs tests, sees the best lipid and liver markers the guy's had. And then a month and a half later, the liver markers are up a bit and his cholesterol numbers have jumped, right? And so what's the immediate response of the MD is to say, we got to put you back on the statin, right? Instead of saying, like, if you know your patient hasn't been on a statin and he's been doing something that has actually improved his values without the best numbers he's had has been in the last month, and now you run another lab panel and the values of cholesterol and LDL have jumped up and the liver markers are up a little bit, wouldn't you ask, like, what changed? We know it wasn't a statin deficiency because he's been off the statins for a while. But before you rush to go give a statin, and the values, aren't astronomical, they're just up a bit from what would be considered more normal range to a less normal range. But the problem, and this is the stuff that really irks me. You could have a really good allopathic physician that would look at that and say, hey, what changed in the last month and a half? Because something changed because you weren't on the statin. This is not a statin deficiency. Something changed in your diet, your lifestyle, your
Right.
stress level. What changed? If they would have just asked that question, they would have found out that this was a person who was doing some gallbladder support, stopped his gallbladder support, and hey, there's part one. What's part two? Oh, I was on a bunch of antibiotics because of some other condition. Oh, Then the third part is, hey, I had stopped drinking alcohol and then I started drinking some alcohol again. So instead of asking those questions and then saying, hey, why don't you get back on the support you were taking to help your gallbladder? You're now off let's get you off that antibiotic, or now that you're off the antibiotic, and let's get you to go back to stop drinking alcohol, because obviously you were healing a damaged liver and biliary system to begin with. It wouldn't that have been so easy? But the initial thing was, you got to go back on the statin or you're going to have a heart attack. Like, really, that to me, I don't care if that was functional medicine or allopathic medicine, that's bad medicine.
Yes, it is. But what you just described is the common experience of the average person in the traditional setting. And and I can't tell you how many people have come to me in tears with stories like this, because they're helping perpetuate the belief in people that
they can't help themselves.
Exactly.
They're your slave to a drug, right?
Yes.
That, hey, you have no control, but all they had to do is take one step back, look at the 30,000-foot view and say, hey, listen, you had control of this. You were doing everything right to improve your lipids, to reduce your cardiovascular risk, to improve the health of your liver and biliary system. And you went away from, there's some three things probably changed this in a very short period of time. And this is a simple fix.
It is simple.
Stop the antibiotic, stop consuming the alcohol, and get back to doing the repair mechanisms to fix it. But
because they were obviously working.
Right. But it's like, oh my gosh, this is my beef is not good with good medical physicians who think. And that's the thing. You can have a good medical physician who thinks functionally, who says, let me kind of think about how I can change this. What's the root issue? What's the root cause? We see good allopathic physicians that have functional mindsets, but we see too many people in allopathic medicine and functional medicine that just continue to think allopathically and not look at the root cause issues, right?
Exactly.
So look, this was a great conversation.
I loved this conversation,
right?
Dr. Eric.
And we could spend another hour. I didn't realize we were over an hour and 15 minutes at it. So
for hours about this.
But obviously you have a functional medicine philosophy. You're into this, you're doing it, you're helping people. There are people who want to know more about you and try and may want to hear more about you, hear more about how you talk, how you speak, may want to look to you for some help of their own help with their own healthcare issues. Where can they find your information? Where can they find you?
So I can be found in a couple of different places. A really, really great way. Well, you can find me on my website, which is www.healthytransformationswithheart.com. You can also find me on Instagram at healthytransformations_heart. If you want to connect more personally, a really, really great way to do that is to join my Facebook group. It's called the Women's Wellness Collective. It's a beautiful organic community, just a safe, sacred healing space for women to come and find connection and community and be able to show up and, wherever they're at on their healing journey with whatever they've got going on, and feel like they have a place where they can feel like they're understood, heard, and also a place to be able to ask questions, get tips and support. So that's a really great way to find me too.
Awesome. Well, it was a great conversation. I have to think about getting you back on and finish this conversation down the line. For any of the listeners, if you listen to this, probably listen to it a couple times, because we kind of went a little bit quick or fast because we're excited and heated about what we're talking about. Share this conversation with your friends and your family so they can understand, get a better understanding of what they should kind of consider when they're talking to their medical physician
Yeah.
versus their functional medicine practitioner. So they're not frustrated many times when they go to a functional medicine practitioner, or I should say when they go to an allopathic physician and expect a functional medicine approach. Most times you're not going to get it. It's not within the guidelines. It's not within the rules of how they can practice, and it's not within much of the training that they get. So when you understand a little bit more about what allopathic is kind of driving allopathic medicine and the primary philosophy, and you understand what the functional medicine philosophy should be, you can get through appointments without being as frustrated, like, oh my gosh, nobody's listening to me. You're probably asking the wrong physician for a type of care that they're not matched to. Okay. So we'll sign off with this. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And for our listeners, stay tuned for another episode in the next couple weeks. Okay. Take care.